On September 19, 2005, British soldiers in Basra, Iraq, watched as two of their own men, their faces bloodied from blows to the head, were paraded on an Iraqi television. The announcer announced in Arabic that the men had been accused of murdering an Iraqi police officer, were being held in the city where they had been based, and would be tried. Blood pressure rose in more than one of the men who felt as if they had been punched in the face. What they didn't know was that in another location nearby were men who weren't British Army, but SS men. As the lieutenant colonel in charge of their unit watched the screen replay the sequence several times over the next hour, a sick feeling rose in his gut. The men had been taken by corrupt police who sympathized with the insurgency, particularly the Mahdi militia. The chances of surviving beyond a few days were slim at best. They needed help, and they needed it now. Realizing that his squad was too small to handle the task, he radioed his superior and another SAS unit 300 miles north to ask for reinforcements. The men donned their gear, readied their H&Ks and C8s, and headed toward the waiting C-130. The lieutenant colonel started making more calls to find out where the men were. As he was trying to come up with a plan, one of his senior officers piped over the phone. He expected the order to proceed, but what happened next changed him forever. Permission denied. Lives are more important than a few phone calls. It wasn't a general in the field. It was the senior general in permanent joint headquarters at Northwood in England, where British military operations were conducted in the war in Iraq. The lieutenant colonel couldn't believe what he was hearing. He kept telling the general how dangerous it was to leave the two men unescorted, but each time he was overruled. That was the end of the call, and at that moment, the SAS commander knew that someone in a high-ranking position in the British Army was really not interested in the lives of his men. He also knew that it was the Ministry of Defense, not Northwood, who had given the orders. The CO reluctantly picked up the phone and called the commanding officer, who was in the C-130 with his men, the engines running, ready to take off. Even the commanding officer was astonished at what the lieutenant colonel had to say. Afterward, the commanding officer turned to his men, telling them what had happened. They were angry. Political correctness had struck again. He wanted to quit right now. He knew that many of his men would resign as soon as they heard about this. There was nothing he or anyone else could do. His two men were going to be left to fend for themselves. Then he made his decision. He reached into his pocket, lifted the phone, and hailed the SAS detachment on the C-130, saying, "We were doing it anyway. Forget about the political correctness." The C-130 moved to take off, and the lieutenant colonel reckoned that his career in the army was over, that he and anyone else who defied orders would face a court-martial. Strangely, he didn't care about those things. He was too well trained to let them happen. What he did care about was figuring out a way to save his men. He got up and went back out to join the others, and there they were again, two captured British SAS in t-shirts and slacks, staring at him in a sullen expression as if they were being berated in Arabic. The lieutenant colonel knew they must be wondering, do they know where we are? Will they come? And, damn it, they would. The only problem was, he feared that they would be moved before the rescue came. Others were determined to try, though. Local officials and ordinary British Army officers also saw the two SAS prisoners. They found the police station, which was in a section known as Jamiat, within a fortified compound with prefabricated buildings. A small team of officers accompanied by two warrior infantry fighting vehicles went to the station to negotiate for the release of the prisoners and to try to resolve the situation in a peaceful manner. About 100 soldiers arrived in trucks to block off the station. The men arrived at the station and were met by a woman, a Muslim lawyer, who pleaded on their behalf for them to be released. All attempts to get permission to enter the station were ignored, and a crowd swelled around them. The men were forced to leave, and the soldiers also. The warriors, however, were not so fortunate. The crowd began to shout and throw stones and Molotov cocktails against the two vehicles. One was burned to death, and his crew had to abandon him. Another was gutted before being saved and put on the back of the last warrior, who sped away as the crows crowed in celebration. The whole place looked like a ticking time bomb. The C-130 landed in Basra on the day of the retreat and unloaded its payload. The colonel called in reinforcements and told them about the unsuccessful rescue attempt. The SAS unit was now down to 10 warriors, plus a couple of helicopters for backup. As the sun went down, they drove through the crowded streets toward the police station, keeping an eye out for any signs of an ambush. The drive itself was remarkably quiet. The crowd was nowhere to be seen as they rounded the corner toward the station. Then the warriors fired their engines and burst through the wall. They rolled right through all the buildings except the station building. There were men running from the warriors all around the compound. Some were going into the station itself, while others were going in to kill or take out the police or any militants in the area. The blast of flashbangs was deafening. Gunshots rang out as the last of the foolish militants who had raised their guns went down with dozens of shells in their heads. Inside the station, the SAS came face to face with policemen who held their hands up in fear as the SAS disarmed them, handcuffed them, and made them lay on the ground. Then came the cell search, where they discovered that their worst fear of being moved had come true. They began questioning the policemen, and just as quickly as the attack began, they got lucky. The two men told the SS that they were in a villa nearby. The unit quickly regrouped and headed toward the new target, a villa just a few meters away. The streets were empty and the villa appeared to be unoccupied. Again, fearing the captives were dead or even executed, the SAS attacked methodically, bursting into the villa at several points. There were more flashbangs amid the empty rooms, no sign of the prisoners or their captors. The next door was breached, a bathroom. Team members stormed in, and there they were, bound and beaten, but alive. The SAS vetted them and whisked them out the villa into the arms of a waiting warrior, the rest of the unit following. The armored column turned and ran from the scene. The helicopter pilots, who had watched the whole thing go down, turned around and flew back to base. The SAS men below remained calm as they made their way to the base, where they were taken to a hospital, and only then did the congratulations begin. A textbook operation with no loss of life, and the good guys saved. As the night fell, the sense of unease returned, especially with the return of their leaders. They wondered what the future held for the British government. News of the rescue quickly spread from headquarters to the Ministry of Defense and finally to the Prime Minister. As the story spread to the media, the bosses knew they had a black mark on their reputation, and the thought of punishing men for rescuing British soldiers they had sent into battle was too painful to contemplate. So they decided that the best thing to do was to authorize the rescue, even knowing the mission was over, so they could save their own skin in the game and punish the rescuers without consequence. Worse still, the government would later learn that the SAS leadership were on the brink of resigning en masse if they had attempted to stop the mission. Years later, the two ex-prisoners were interviewed by the British press and told their story of how they came to be caught. They had been working with local police who had serious doubts about their loyalties. Dressed in Arab fatigues, the two men were part of a group of 2 cars driving back to base when they encountered a police checkpoint. They assumed the police were real militants, and when they came to search their car, the 2 men raised their weapons and a shootout began. 1 police officer died and 3 others were injured before the car sped away with pursuing police cars. They were soon overtaken, radioed their location, then stopped and walked out with their hands above their heads. The police put them in a car and drove to Jamiat, where they were found to be part of an anti-British militia. They were strip-seated, tied up and beaten before they were called in front of a TV camera for their first television appearance. They were held at the station until the first attempt was made to win their freedom. Then they were taken to a villa. When the SAS attacked the station, the militants protecting them fled in terror, leaving them alone. This is where the story begins. This is a story that the SAS still look back on with pride, despite the fact that the very government they served was willing to let them die in the name of political correctness. If you enjoyed this gripping tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling stories. Stay tuned for more riveting content, and until next time, salute to the indomitable spirit of the warriors who risked everything for their comrades. Thank you for watching.